Like 2 hours of counseling every single day?
Do you guys want to do a quick mic check, make sure everything's good?
Hello, hello.
Mic check. Hello.
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 Microphone check.
Mic check.
Check, check. Oh. Thank you.
All right. How did you guys do that? That's like fancy. Oh, there it is. Jamie said he was going to sing for us, right? Didn't you say that?
If ever I would leave you, it wouldn't be in springtime.
Can I get everybody's attention just for a second?
I sung a lot of karaoke. I'm sorry.
All
and
right,
I can't
Jamie,
sing.
Jamie, I'm going to interrupt you. We have an important announcement
Oh,
from
sure.
Madeline. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, this is so lame, I'm sorry, but whoever parked like a blue SUV at the end of the driveway, we need you to move your car. The beer delivery people like literally can't get out. No idea who it is.
Mission
but-
critical.
but
Mission critical.
just
Keep the
also,
beer
like-
here.
Must be beer.
That's the idea.
We've trapped it here by design.
Thanks, Hap.
tuck in, just like tuck to the sides, because people are kind of veering out more
Yeah.
and more into the driveway, and that's like a big fire scene.
Yeah, if you've got folks coming up tonight, just watch that parking because you do need to think about people need to be able to get in and out. And some of us that live in the county, we have rigs.
Hello. Hello.
We don't have these fuel efficient little cars. I have a Tacoma. Who am I kidding? But if you guys want to if you have people coming up, just do watch your parking. That's the PSA announcement from Lauer Lake Lodge today.
Try that again, Luis. Try your mic.
Hello.
This is Janice's high school microphone.
Oh.
Imagine the things this mic has seen. Or heard. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Yes? Are you feeling all regenerated? I'm not a grammar person, so I get to have, what we're going to do this afternoon is have a little conversation, have some fun. We have this theme that you may have heard about. And when we put this together, Mike and I have this meeting that we do every year, and I always tell him it's my favorite. So after you all have registered, after everything is booked, we know who's all coming. We kind of just have this dream session, and it's almost like pin the tail on the rider. And we sit there and we have all of these, like, what do we want to do with all these folks, and what is the theme, and how do we plan? And that's when we put it together, all the evening readings, and what about. And we were talking and we said, oh my gosh, did you realize we had 3 poet laureates here? We should do a poet laureate panel. And then I got this, like, my eyes went in 2 different directions, and I said, I want to do a generations panel, and I would like to pick people from 4 generations or 3 generations or 2 generations, but pick people who have experience with different writers. And these 4 people popped up into my head, and part of it was I know 3 of them. Roberto and I had never met, and that was why I wanted him on the panel. I thought, well, this will be fun. We'll put him on the stage with everybody and put him on the spot. I've been in panels with Luis before, and so I know that's going to be fun. Jamie, he's a wild card. We'll see what happens, And JaNay is as nice as she seems, but she's got some stuff going on. So I think we're going to have a good time. So what we want to do is I'm going to do a quick intro. I think you all know all these folks. We're not going to read bios. We're not going to do a dance. What we want to do for you this afternoon is have a conversation, and we're going to look at generations from 3 different perspectives, much like we talked about at the opening. So generations as the generations in your ancestors, where they come from, generations as in what generation do you identify as, and then if we have time, a little bit of generative writing. But I want to look at it from 2 different points of view. How do you write voices for different generations? How do we talk about thinking about generations in our, who's listening or who's reading? Do you think about the different generations that you're writing for? And then as a teaching perspective too, how do you craft a workshop or an experience for folks that are coming from different generations and perspectives? So that's going to be it. We're going to have a little conversation around it. And let's have some fun. So before we do that, I'd like to just do a quick intro. At the end is our longtime friend, Roberto, I've just changed his name. Luis Alberto Urrea, whom you're going to hear much more from Saturday night. But Luis has been, how long now? You said 25 years?
Yeah, we've been coming for 25. Yeah.
Yeah, and your daughter Chayo, who is now, 43, is learned
She
to
is,
crawl
yeah,
here. Yeah.
Yeah, she learned to crawl here.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And Jamie Ford, whom you got to hear, gosh, was that just 2 nights ago? Yeah, 2 nights ago, and you'll get to hear again tomorrow at the keynote. I do want to say for any of you, again, I want to repeat, some of you have asked me again, if you have paid for a week-long workshop or year-long, you don't have to pay for a ticket. If you want to bring a date, you need to work that out with them, that they pay for their ticket, but you are absolutely here, and that's just to set you up. So how many fish traps is this for you?
My wife and I have this disagreement. I think it's 4. She says it's 5. So 4.5.
She's right, yeah. I trust Leisha. I think it's Leisha's right. Yeah, it's 5. Yeah, thank you. Roberto Ascalon, this is your first. How's it going? How's your first experience?
It's lovely. I can't actually believe I'm here. It's a thrill, and I want to thank Jamie for suggesting my name. It's not only an honor, but it's amazing to be able to figure out how writing as a writer's life works, and how how people can actually make a community like this that feels in a particular way. I think it's a unique feeling among any writing residency or conference I've ever been to.
That's great. He's also going to be the inaugurator of bringing a tent into a tent. So if you've seen him in the evening readings, that's great. And JaNay, this is your third, right? Yes, JaNay was one of the folks that jumped in and saved us during the pandemic with our virtual workshop. And then we loved her so much. She was teaching a workshop for adults on writing children's literature. And we all went, I wonder if she'd teach kids. And she did. And then we loved her so much, she said, will you do it again? And she said, yes, if her father would drive her here. So that's what we did. So
Pretty much.
how are you? How's it going for you?
Wonderful. Oh, it's a treasure to spend time with the Fishtrap youth. I mean, adults are cool too, but it's just so much fun being with the youth, hearing their ideas, seeing their excitement, for literacy, for writing words and their thoughts and their stories. So it's been another beautiful experience.
Well, we're glad you're here, and I hope you keep coming back. And some of them haven't met each other yet, so this is your first exposure. So I'm going to start right off with a novelist question because I'm curious about this myself. So this is probably more for Luis and Jamie. Feel free to fight over who gets to answer it, but I'm curious about a couple of things. You both have written historical fiction novels. So how do you think about writing from the voice of characters who predate you in their understanding and their generation?
Yeah, Jamie, how do you do it?
Yeah. I do some weird things. So like if I'm writing about 1909, I bought a whole bunch of high school yearbooks from 1909 because I want to see how high school students are writing to each other. One, they have incredible penmanship, but I just wanted to know the vernacular, the slang, the language. I also will read contemporaneous novels from the era and collect newspapers and read those from the era. It's like, and then I collect a bunch of anachronistic language that we don't use now, but is germane to the time period. And I keep that in mind when I have a description. I'm like, oh, that one will fit right here. So that's kind of how I do it.
That's not enough. Tell more. Historical. I don't think of the books as historical novels so much. But yeah, The Hummingbird's Daughter and the sequel, Queen of America, and obviously the new one about World War II. World War II is easier than pre-revolutionary Mexico, with a woman folk saint who was erased by the revolution. She died right before it started. And the historians were all male, and they were not perforce feminists, and they did not love indigenous people either. And they were terrified of the Yaqui tribe. So it was a very difficult job reconstructing her. However, you know, Cindy, the world's greatest wife, manager, and co-pilot, is a journalist, and my thoughts are scattered. And so, you know, she came up with something so simple, I was astonished. Why don't we create a timeline of her life? I thought, what? Seriously? What magic is this? And, you know, so everything that we could find that was on the record, indisputable, we made a timeline. Same with the World War II stuff. You know, these women have been completely forgotten, erased. The records building for this service burned down. So they're literally erased by culture and by history. So my task was finding out what I could, and sometimes, you know, like Emily Dickinson said, write it slant. I had to slant my way in. And so with The Hummingbird's Daughter, in some sense, it was simpler because there are communities all over Mexico, healer women, who don't care that she died. She still works with them. And so you walk into a living room where she's apparently having tea with you, even though your aunt has been dead since 1906. And there's a series of ritualistic and historical and cultural data stuff that has never changed. And so to have people accept you and believe you and open all the secrets was incredible. For Goodnight Irene, my mother's service, like I said, in the Red Cross as a donut dolly, fairly erased, and her own trauma from the war really garbled things as well. But through some weird literary miracle, her partner in the truck they drove in lived 90 minutes away from our house. And she was that woman who, you didn't break me, pal. I got it together. So she knew every day, everything, every duty. And so I relied on those witnesses and those voices, and then trusted my imagination to kind of round it out in a way that didn't betray the people I was writing about.
My understanding too, some of that particular generation, you know, the best, what do they call it, the World War II generation, the name just flew out of my head, but that they tended to not talk about their experiences, even if they had a voice to do so. And that perspective too, I would think, would be an interesting place to dive into.
Well, yeah, I think so many people we've talked to, but also I know all of you know someone, people who've been in combat, they have a very difficult time later and they don't share. It was interesting. I think the one remove that I wasn't actual family, that I was doing this work, people would tell me, well, I've got to tell you this thing. And a lot of the events in the book are people confessing to me. And, you know, our veterans are suffering unbelievably. And it's very personal to us. We had a friend at the gym we go to, a lovely guy, a realtor, the sweetest man ever, Marine, had the Marine tats. And he was getting very interested in finding us a lake house. You know, man, you're going to be a famous writer. Let's get a lake house. I was like, yeah, let's do it. And right before we started the tour, he killed himself. He shot himself. And after the fact, then you think, oh my God. You know, but when you're there and he's sweet, and he's happy, he's got kids, but then you realize that he couldn't work out because he was on the phone every 30 seconds. And they said he kept himself busy day and night, round the clock. And then nobody knew this was coming. But it's happening a lot. And with the donut dollies, they are gone. From that generation, everyone is dead, except one woman who's 102, about to turn 103. And she wants to talk to us, but she can't hear. So apparently she has a device that will type out whatever we say to her on the phone. And that's incredibly touching to me, you know.
Wow. Okay. Well, you're giving them a voice they didn't have before, which is pretty remarkable. So, kind of to bring back this idea, I'm curious about when you're writing, and this is for any of you, but you know, gosh, I think I'm going to start with you, JaNay. You have a very much a defined audience. You know who you're writing for, and you're starting to write for a little bit older kids, and then you're turning around and working with, in your university career with adults. How do you think about reaching generations and different audiences in that way? What kind of thought processes go through?
If I were to give it a term, I'd say authenticity across the board. And I try to go up and be my authentic self, so regardless of what age I'm working with, they can pick up on that. But when I'm writing, I try to do that too. And what I mean, like, for example, if I'm writing for children and I'm writing a certain age, I want to make sure that I'm capturing the right voice of that age. I think sometimes when adults are writing children's books, like they're writing at kids, using a voice that they think kids sound like, as opposed to actually going and doing the research to listen to kids, observe them, so that, again, that authenticity can come through in the writing. So I just feel like that piece is important to me. And it works for young kids, but it also works for when I'm working with adults. Let's be authentic in what we're doing here, and then sort of build off of that.
Roberto, I know, not just as a writer, but you're also an educator too. You work a lot with adolescents and teens. What do you think of, how does their generational perspective impact how you connect with them?
In my early years as a youth worker, I used to do a lot of writing alongside. In fact, some of my most productive work came out of authentic writing circles, like the one that we created this year at Fishtrap. But in my earlier years, I didn't know how to titrate my own authenticity, as it were. So as a young person growing up in slam, or youngish, actually I wasn't young, what the hell, I was like in my late 20s, early 30s. Yeah, I'm still young-ish, yeah. But I was working alongside these, 14 to 18-year-olds, and I was going for mine. I was just doing my work alongside in the writing circle. And it pushed the writing circle to be edgy. I mean, it really was edgy. In fact, spam comes from, I was just doing a free write, and it happened to be about theophagy, like eating gods, and like, and then like I cut my finger and then got on spam, and like, because I was opening the can, and like, and thinking about spam as communion. And I was writing all this in a writing circle with like 14-year-olds. And and somebody was like, oh, you, JT, and he said, you should really write that. You should write about spam. I'm Filipino. You're Filipino. You should write about spam. And then I did. And that's where that poem came from. Now, as an older, I create really healthy boundaries. I don't know. I don't know if my work, I'm sad because I don't have an access point to that kind of work and that energy, that youth energy that actually fills me up. But I make, I think, safer, healthier workspaces. There's a trade-off there. So
That's interesting. I'm curious. I see you both nodding about thinking about how you, as your career progresses too, have you noticed how the people that you work with as educators, as teachers, how does that feed your work, and does it change generationally? Do you still feel like they feed you in the same way, or are you creating that same distance that Roberto talked about? I asked a tough question there.
Most of my books, I'm searching for my grandfather. I'm searching for my dad. I'm searching for my great-grandfather. I mean, literally last summer I went to Tonopah, Nevada, trying to find my great-grandfather's grave because I know he passed away there. I did find it. It's buried under 30 feet of mining waste. But aside from that, I know it's really tragic. There's like a tourist attraction that is the Pioneer Cemetery. And then outside of the fence is where the Chinese immigrants were. And then that's where they dumped a bunch of stuff. But on a better note, I'm searching for them, and by extension, I'm looking for myself, and also thinking that when I'm gone, I want my kids to read my books and go, oh, there you are. You get me.
I see you shaking your head. You know, each of you, I know, you're talking to about, you've written about your mother and your ancestors. You talked about, you know, writing to your mother and their background. That's an interesting thing. Do you think you're each mining for stories of your families as you're talking about this, or following that journey, trying to tell your story? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I feel like every story that I write, every poem that I write is somehow a love letter to either my family, my son. I was going to read another one last night about my sister, and it connects me. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I've written enough or that I could ever write enough. And I think there are people in a family that are supposed to be the storytellers, you know, that hold all the stories, and I feel really paltry in that regard. I don't feel like I listen to my mother's stories enough. I don't feel like I can actually transmit them. And I know that my sister, who's a poet in her own right and a writer, she has all these stories that I don't have. But I really feel you about this, like, undiscovered self and undiscovered family, and this layer, like literal layers of colonialism that are like shoved on top of that, that you have to sort out in order to get to who you are.
If I may, in a literal way, after my first book was published, family members that I'm related to that I didn't know I had reached out to me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you know, I was your great grandfather's brother. I'm your great uncle, and come to San Francisco, and I'm going to introduce you to all this family here." One of these people, one of my dad's cousins, is my cousin by, I don't know how many, fourth cousin, fifth cousin. It's a cousin, and especially in Asian families, it's like we're cousins. Yeah. You're my uncle. You're my auntie. You're too young to be my auntie, but you know what I mean. It's with love. A cousin in Australia had my grandfather's photo albums from when he was an actor in Hollywood in the 30s through the 50s. And there's all these photos, you know, they're press photos of Clark Gable and Betty Davis signed to my grandfather. It's in this big notebook, and there's all these photos of him on the set. There's him on the set of Shanghai Express, a movie that was made in 1932 with Anna May Wong and Marlene Dietrich, and there he is. And it's like a gift. You write this thing, and I never would have expected something like that, but it just sort of seems like the heavens opened up and blessed me.
I just wanted to add, when I think about when I'm writing, and I think others might agree, there's always a piece of us in our writing, even if, I don't know, it's something that maybe it's not exactly your experience, but something that you did have an experience of is somehow infused in there. That's how I think about it. And so because of that, I feel like my generations are always in my writing, whether it's a really literal or parent one, like my book, Grandma's Tiny House, which I don't remember if I shared. My dad had 12 siblings. I always get it wrong, Daddy. 13, 14, whatever. He had a lot of siblings, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And so here's the story of everyone coming together, piling into my grandma's house, right? But then when I think about generations too, I think about my dad when he would read stories to me, Dr. Seuss, Shel Silverstein, and so his cadence is in my mind when I'm writing poems. But I would then assume that some of those experiences he had with his, family members infuse how he deals with, his daughters when he's sharing stories, for example. And then that goes beyond and beyond and beyond. So because of that, that's why I'm saying I just feel like generations are always sort of embedded in our stories in some way because of the relationship that we've had to our ancestors through the relationships that we have with our current family members. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. But that's kind of how I think about it too.
Yeah, it's this is a really good question, I think, for all of us. But it's been odd for me because the way I was raised, even though, look at me, I look like Irish man, but my mom was the only American. They were all Mexicans. And I can explain this to you. My grandmother from Sinaloa was named Guadalupe McMurray. So we're this little genetic mutant crew, right? But I learned Spanish first, and I loved Tijuana. I had no idea Tijuana until I moved to San Diego was some hellhole of filth and depravity. It was just where I lived, and Christmas was cool, and my aunties were there, and stories, and it was awesome. Then later on, I went to Sinaloa, to where the family roots were, and found out the border's not Mexico. Those aren't Mexicans. That's not even a region of the country. Then I went to Mexico City, and they said, people from Sinaloa, that's not Mexicans. It's Mexico City people. And I started to realize how absurd this whole thing was, and how toxic it is, how poisonous it is. And in my teaching, I've got to say that we're in Chicago, and our university is on the very edge of the South Side. And they keep trying to figure out, how do we get those students of color up in here, And they call me about every 3 years. Hey, Luis, could you spearhead, a program to bring Mexicans? And I say the same thing every time, and nothing happens. And so, people need a little bit of tuition relief. People need programs where they feel secure. People need faculty that reflects who they are. And there's a lot of issues like that in the system. And so I talked to the Latin American Studies Department instead of dealing with the admin. And I said, look, I can only do so much, but it can be powerful if you do what I'm telling you to do. And so I said, first of all, we have to get those students who are coming from the barrio to get used to expressing stuff. You're not going to walk into this classroom full of all these well-meaning, bright white faces and tell them your family secrets, And so I said, so we need to start a tertulia first. Just a gathering with the old fart. They can come in and sit and talk. That's it. And they didn't understand because you're our famous author. So they had brought in a chef and musicians playing mariachi, And I said, no, this completely ruins the whole event. This wasn't the idea, So we did a second one. And that was just in a classroom. And I invited Latinx artists and actors to come. And we just sat and talked. We sat and talked and told stories, and the students started telling stories, and the actors were going crazy about, representing. And a young man comes up to me, stout young gentleman, and he's acting very shy, and he said, listen, I'm really moved by what you're talking about, Holmes, but I'm gang related. And I said, welcome to the club. My whole family is in gangs. He said, they are, for real? I said, yeah. I said, who are you with? He said, Latin kings. I said, amor de rey, which they say to each other. And he was like, and I told him, I went to the high school, Latino youth high school, and there was a war between two sets. And your boys, I said, volunteered to be my bodyguards. And everywhere I went, I had 4 Latin kings walking with me, like I was the president. As if in Latino youth high school, there's going to be an outbreak. And I sat down to do my talk, and they sat across the front of the table and on the sides. And at the end of it, the leader of their group, a guy named Mario, stops me and says, you ain't going to forget us, are you? And I said, I will never forget you. This is fantastic. And he gave me a poem he'd written. And then he says, I hope I see you again, homie. And I said, I tell you what, why don't you bring some of the guys out to Naperville? And he said, our little lily white suburb. What? I said, come out to Naperville and, we'll have a cookout. He says, you asking the Latin Kings to come to Naperville? And I said, you don't have to kill anybody, dude. Just eat a hot dog. And it was so magical because there was no, I think sometimes people trying to be, velvet glove, it keeps instilling young people that they're somehow dangerous or not one of us. Let's be us together. And he was great. I put his poem up on the door, and he gave me one of the best bits of wisdom that I've kept with me forever. He was totally exhausted one day. He said, man, I've been up since 3 this morning. I said, what are you doing? He said, I had to go bail somebody out. I had to go do this stuff. And he looks at me and he says, brother, the thug life, too much responsibility, man. So how can you not want to say, let's write, tell your story, So that's where I'm at in all of this stuff.
Well, so let me ask each of you, how are you doing that, reaching out to different generations in your own teaching then? I mean, that's a beautiful story. Do you have something similar that I don't know if you've had people to your house to have hot dogs, but, is there,
So I don't know if I'm ever going to make it as just like a purely, on my writing, making like an income.
Right.
So what I do is teach, and it just so happens that because I'm a poet, or maybe just because the animal that I am, like I can turn anything into a metaphor. Yeah. And so then I teach class at, I created this organization called the Food Empowerment Education Sustainability Team, FEAST. And then we did, we would all bring our knowledge, and I'd give them knives, and I say, let's cook. And then we would create, I'd take vegetables, and then mostly vegetables. We start out with whatever anybody's eating, and then you, add a little bit more vegetables. So maybe it's ramen, and then it's a little vegetables, and then, you might have chicken from the corner store here, but then suddenly you're cooking 5-course meals with everybody just doing a little bit. I can do that with biking. I can do that with snowboarding. I can do that with really anything to turn into a metaphor for life. So when we extend our sensibilities as writers, we can make poetry with young people's lives, I think. So, yeah.
Any other thoughts on that about connecting with? Have you done a lot of work with youth at all in your writing workshops?
Do I work with youth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
mean, you've had
I've visited
youths too,
probably
so, yeah.
more than 100 high schools across the country. So I will do youth workshops, and they're all different because every community is different, and in one instance, there's different grades and all that stuff. But yeah, and I raised a house full of teenagers, so I'm pretty comfortable with kid chaos. I'm the youngest of 5. I'm a product of kid chaos, so. I'm always kind of honored when someone asks me to come and be part of that. This is the craziest thing is you never know if you're reaching anybody. Like sometimes, I'll do a workshop and I'll give a talk, and at the end of my talk, I always say, this is just for some of you. Some of you will hear me, some of you will not. But in every 100 students, there's probably 5 of you for whom high school is not a party. High school is something you are struggling to survive. And if that's you, that was me. And hang in there. The world is made a better place by late bloomers. And I spoke at a high school one time, and I'm out in the parking lot, and I see the counselor open the door, and a young girl comes running across the parking lot and threw her arms around me and said, "That's me." And it was one of those great moments.
That is sacred. I think what we don't understand is that so many of I consider them our children, our kids that we care so much about are made to feel like other, separate from others. And the gap is huge. And you know, I'm lucky because they think I'm funny, so we can kid around, and you can say a lot of truths and be surprised. But I'm always asking, in the professors, for example, some of them have really weird old belief systems. And one year we had 2 Chicanas in the grad program. Both of them bounced out. One of them because she was told by her thesis manager, whatever, that she certainly didn't speak English well enough to write this paper. Oh my God, I wanted to say this woman has been through all the years of primary, you know, she went to undergrad, she's been through grad school, are you kidding? And the other one, because she didn't write a high enough quality of Spanish. She was writing street Spanish, and I thought, she's a tagger, she's like a street poet, she was what they claimed they wanted. And the professor's response when I brought this up said, well, this is the only chance we have for ritual hazing. She thought, you know, we make it hard, this kid's going to shape up. And it was horrible. It felt like, so it wasn't the first time. I'm always telling Cindy, that's it, I'm quitting, I'm leaving. But it's so worth it, you know, and to see people just trust a little bit. And we know it's awfully hard to trust the system, the power system. You see millions and millions and millions of dollars around you, but there's no help for you. That's not fair. And the little Tertulia, once they trusted me, because the next step was, why don't you write something? I'm sick of talking about my stuff. And they started writing poems, and then we made a class. And then invested in doing a little publication for them. So, you know, it can be done. It just takes some work. And in this atmosphere we have, it just sounds like coddling people, you know, and I don't like that.
You know, my background is early childhood education. So, I mean, I went to school for child development and early childhood education and figuring out ways to create learning environments that really speak to children. And I bring that up because I think being with like preschoolers is a really great learning experience. And what it did for me is help to remind me, meet them where they are. And then that to me applies across the board. So one of the things we do is like emergent curriculum, right? Which is you watch what the kids are doing, you understand why they're doing that, and then you make sure your classroom fits them and helps engage them in that deeper learning. And so this idea, again, of meeting them where they are, I think that can happen in the preschool classroom, that can happen in the elementary, the middle, that can especially happen in the college classroom. So I hear what you're saying, you know, like, I speak your language, I understand your experience, and because of that, I can meet you where you are, and then I pull you in, and now I got you, right? So I think that's one way to connect across generations. Get to know those people that you're with, meet them where they are, and then, I mean, like, beyond, the sky's the limit.
Yes.
I want to follow up with that because this idea of meeting people where they are in an everyday practical life, dealing with a community of writers in a classroom or dealing with just your own community or your family, what advice would you give to people? What does that look like, meeting somebody where they are?
I'm not saying at all that it's easy. It's not. But it goes back to, you know, how I was saying authenticity. I think also being genuine. Like, if you can step in there and show, I'm kind of bearing my heart to you, and I want my heart to meet your heart so that we can then move forward together. So I think that aspect of being genuine and being authentic is a really good starting point. But then also acknowledging that, like, I'm not going to always get this right. So I thought my kids liked the pink and the white paint, and so that's what I put out on the, but they are not even touching it. Now they're playing with the grass. Okay, shifting, moving on to adding in the grass and figuring out how we can learn from that, right? So you're not going to always get it right, but I think that if you're being observant, if you're, again, trying to meet them where they are, and then that you do some adjustment too, they'll see. Like, they'll see the, like, intentionality and the effort. And I think that also helps to open that door a little bit more to then pull them in.
I want to add to that, always come to this moment of engagement with a sense of humility and like self-effacement, like that you can make fun of yourself for whatever it is that you are bringing into the room, and that sense of humility, like, I really don't know. Because, and this happens for folks, a lot of folks, who come from a position of privilege, white folks, like folks who are, got a lot of money, and they try to roll into a thing and then try to put on, and that put on, it just looks like a put on. Don't try to put this on like that, so if you can point that out, so I have a kind of like a shtick, like one of the things I do, I read Spam, and I say, this is what, what was that about? And then I point that out, and I point out all the parts about my identity, and then they'll know where I'm coming from, and so that a person can feel at ease, specifically through the work that you're doing. But this comes for any teacher. You have to kind of call yourself out, and sometimes you make fun of it. Sometimes you just say, hey, I got questions, and sometimes like, I don't know. So, yeah.
I just think it's just important to remember it's not about you, It's about them.
Yeah, I agree. It extends to so many areas, however. Chicago is a very segregated city. Nobody will admit it. And so it's really interesting to walk into a classroom and you can see it divided, People find an island of who they're comfortable with. And you have to, without seeming like, I'm the answer man, I'm illuminated, I will make you blend, honor those people in the class. And I've noticed even still today, the students, the main body of the students, are afraid of Muslim people still. And I'm telling you, over and over, semester after semester, my best undergrad students are young women who wear the hijab. And they're always in the front, and there's a huge swath of empty seats around them. People don't go near them. And I thought, what do you do? And, I don't have the answers, so I asked them, what should I do about this? And they said, just show these people we're human, basically. And so I said, okay, here's the deal. I will come in early every class period. You be here, and we'll start a conversation and let people listen to us talk. See what happens. And I was always saying, how's your father? Oh, he's so funny. And you see people turn. Her father's funny? Yeah, he's so sweet. They'd be like, because people are going on assumptions that are utter ignorance. They don't know anything. They hear propaganda or they have a knee-jerk reaction to whatever. So we would talk every day. And I'd come in and say, Assalamu alaikum. Oh, alaikum assalam. And they, you could see the students calculating, saying, what am I scared of? What do I dislike here? Then slowly but surely, people would move over. And then they'd be in convo, and then there'd be community. And I've grown to love that so much that in the lit classes, I have very devout people who come. And, there's a course called the American Road, and one of them is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And so I tell my Muslim students, this, super haram, okay? And they all laugh. Okay, we're ready. Just that you can say, we can communicate with each other. We are family. There's differences. Who cares? I think that really connects with college students. They're already kind of questioning all the received wisdom anyway. But to make somebody confront their own fear or their own discomfort, you're like, what's that about? What's uncomfortable about anybody in this room? Nothing. And so that's my little one-man mission. And it's really good. And it starts with the disjunct. They come in, they look at me, Well, you substitute? Say no. I'm the guy. You know, when you can start at those topics, I think it gives you a sense of unity and security that you can go anywhere. I hope, so far anyway.
That's a part of why I think children's books are so important.
Yes.
Not just because I write
Yeah.
them,
Well, yeah.
but
Yeah,
because I do
well.
write 'em.
For sale at the book loft this afternoon, yes.
But so there's a scholar named Rudine Sims Bishop, and she coined this term. It's windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors. Are you guys
Ooh.
familiar with this?
No.
So basically, she says that books can be mirrors where they reflect your experience back to you in an authentic way, right? But they can also be windows and sliding glass doors. Windows in the sense that you can kind of peek into someone else's experience. And sliding glass doors that you have a narrative so rich, you can open the door and step into somebody else's shoes and experience through books. And so a part of my impetus as an author is to write diverse books. And at this point, a lot of my books are about, African American characters. But I mean, let's be real. African Americans in this country, there's a stigma, there's a stereotype. So I like to write stories that just show black people being black people. So that way, a kid who might not share my same experience can pick up a book like Grandma's Tiny House and say, oh my gosh, we do that at my house too. And now we have just made a connection, right? And so we're talking about generations. If we can get those books in the hands of young kids, we're already making it like a norm to make a connection with someone else, through books, because you do that at your house and I do too. But even in those instances where, I don't do that at my house, tell me more. Well, here's a book that we can share together where we can all learn about this too. And then you can be the expert and tell us about what you do in your culture. So, I think that utilizing children's books in that way helps to build a better future, a more compassionate future. And so that when they get to college, right, they're already so used to doing that
Exactly.
those seats around those women are taken and they're having conversations because, my whole childhood, I've read lots of books about the Muslim culture.
Right.
And I have at least somewhat an understanding, even though it's not my own experience.
Right.
So that's the power of good children's books. And that also speaks to why we have to make sure they're in the classroom and that everybody is reading them so that children are getting those messages early.
Yes, amen.
I just want to remark, that as both readers, writers, and as a country, that we are facing situations in which this is, some of what we do as in this work is illegal
Yes.
in certain states in this country. And I just want us to take a deep breath and allow ourselves to feel that fear and move through it. Feel that fear and move through it. There's so much work to be done. You can see the scope of work to be done. And I just want to, I think we're in an amazing cohort that does work on all these different levels.
And it's not going to be easy, right? But it's so worth it. That's what we need for a better tomorrow, right? So it's like, pull up your sleeves and make it happen, right?
So kind of to segue off of that, one of the things when we started talking about this generations theme that percolated within our staff, boy, some of the conversations we have, I wish y'all could be there. It's pretty interesting. We talked about ageism as one of the thoughts that when we first came up with this, we had an age range on our staff from 25 to, I won't say, because I'll have somebody throw a rock at my head, but older than 25. And, but how we talk about age and ageism and generation discussions, that ageism is a thing and it's a two-way thing, that there's a lot of looking at, can I tell a story, Mom, about you for a second? A couple weeks ago, we went to Boston. and we're traveling through the airport. And my mom is, hi mom, wave at my mom, she's lovely. This is Kat. She has bad feet. She's brilliant, and she has bad feet. And we're, sorry, but that's what it is. So we were going through the airport, and by the way, we did talk about this as a business plan. She was on, we asked for assistance, which means we got to the airport really fast, and we talked about maybe renting her out to people that want to travel and get through security as an income source. But the funny thing is if you've ever done this or traveled this way or had someone with you that traveled this way, when she went into the wheelchair, it was like she disappeared. And we got to the security section, and the person who was pushing the wheelchair, we were all talking to each other the whole time. She looked at me and said, "Can she walk through the security gate?" And I went, "She's sitting right there.
Right. Yeah.
Ask her." And that, my mother's a gerontology nurse, and she kind of took it like, yeah, this is what happens. But I was so angry on her behalf. I've also seen it on the reverse. These Gen Zers, man, I mean, they're just a bunch of, prickly, angry folks, then they blame us for all the things. And I'm just curious, especially, I'm going to start with you, Luis, because you talked about working with particularly college kids, and your daughter is not 41, Chayo is, 22, 23,
23.
Yeah, that generation. How do you take those risks with those generations? What do you do when you get it wrong?
That is the sword dangling over all of us, isn't it? As aunties, uncles, brothers, parents, grandparents, you do your best. And I hope that, we've established enough respect and trust that the person who has been done wrong by our mistake or whatever can understand and forgive. It's complicated for me in that, we live in this enchanted bubble. We live in the author's family, in the Burbs bubble. And our son, Eric, who you guys know from here, he's now a touring musician. And though it's true that they used to be a pop punk band, and then they've morphed into what I call white boys finally heard Prince. It's another time. Trying to be all funky and singing falsettos. But he's doing his dream. But then the rest of my family, which they feel I abandoned them and left them behind, because I could not survive the world I was in. And I told everybody I'm going to book. First chance I get, I've got to go away and do what I want to do, and I'll be back. And we go back. So here's an example. It's kind of comedic, but it's true. Went back for book tour for the House of Broken Angels. It was tumultuous and wild. My siblings all went, and they had their suits and best dresses from 1978 on, these polyester suits in the front of the bookstore, and I walked in, and they all held up the book. Like I didn't know I wrote it, And thanks. And their kids were scattered around. And there was a group of cholos, hardcore, tattooed members of a set. And they'd never been to a bookstore, never read a book. And they were waiting outside, token up. Órale, tío, ¿qué pasó? Hey, how you guys doing? All right. Hey, am I in that book you wrote it? I said, sure. Órale. And I go in and I do my thing. And one of my nephews, who was a model for a character in the book, and he's sitting there like this the whole time, and I thought, oh God, I've offended him, right? And the signing line, and he comes up and he pushes people out of the way. I want to talk to my tío. I said, okay, let me have it. He goes, I got one thing to ask you, tío. I said, okay, what is it? Who gonna play me in the movie, dog? Right? So I'm processing this, and I look over, and the vatos have got the store manager jacked up. You're gonna find out what's gonna happen. You diss my uncle, man. And I went over there. What's going on? They ran out of your books, sons of bitches. And I said, no. I get paid for every one of those books. They're like, órale. Clean them up. And I think, you know, if we just keep our wits about us and can navigate the tides, you know, those, just because those folks, for whatever reason, intimidate us or scare us or seem so different from us, we're at the end of the day people. And you talk to a person as a human being with respect and humor, not, oh, you're such a loser. No, we are funny, aren't we? Yes, we are. You know, it gets us all over the world now, except Cindy, who likes to wear, you know, screw the Border Patrol T-shirts in Montana.
Yay, Cindy.
I know. Oh yeah. Yay, Cindy. The truckers always stop and look at her, and then they turn and look at me. And I was like, they're gonna beat me up.
That's a different topic.
Yeah.
Jamie, what about the issues of racism? Sorry, boy, I went right there. About ageism, and how have you also, like you say, you have teenagers, you've raised teenagers. Yeah, how does that, do you see it in both directions?
You know, I have blinders to it. I was closer to my grandfather than my dad. And so whenever there's someone who has more years on me, I'm all ears. And they're all around us, and we don't know their stories. And I love being in like Chinatown, and I'll see like an 88-year-old woman with a stooped back, and she's got a walker, and she's sniffing oranges in the grocery store, and you don't know what her story is. She's, you know, you might ask her, and she's like, oh yeah, when I was young, I got beaten in the Cultural Revolution. I swam to an island where I could catch a boat to Taiwan, and they persecuted my family, and now I came here, and I became a teacher, and I taught for 30 years, and then I retired. I mean, she lived a life. All of us, we're more than this moment, this tweet.
Right.
And I don't want anyone to be judged by their worst or last moment. And there's a continuum, I really believe. And so regardless of age, I just, this sounds really zen, but, you know, we're lonely islands on the ocean, and you drain the ocean, and we're all connected. And so I try to remember that.
I'm just looking at you because I can't. Hi. No, I mean, because you're working with youth, and I think sometimes what we hear is that they don't feel like we're listening sometimes. Have you experienced that, the ageism going from the older to the younger? I mean, have you heard that from them? Or are they just,
I don't know. I can't, because I can't tell how old I am.
Well, yeah.
It's like you know, I work with young people so much, and it really does keep you young.
Yeah.
And your vernacular switches. You know, I code switch all the time. There's a few trends that I've noticed, but can't tell whether or not I'm being programmed by things I'm watching on, you know, the screens and the nets and the tubes or whatever. But in that way, like, are people quicker to put you out? So that thing of grace and that thing of, you know, like, are people, you know, like, I don't know. And I've like, young folks have a definitive understanding of themselves, and I think much more so than I did when I was their age. And it's because partly of the screens and the tubes and the thingers. There's more mirrors, there's more sliding doors, and there's more of that. So they can understand themselves more quickly, more rapidly than we ever could have in that time frame. I don't know whether or not I can, you know, I don't want to make a mistake sometimes, and I don't want to offend and thus get thrown out the house. You know, like, I want to, because partly it is my job to create a container, and that's my sacred duty. You know, my covenant is to, like, as a teacher, everyone is in the boat. Everyone is in the container. And so I have to expand my own sensibilities. I have to change my language, retrain my brain to use different languages. And sometimes, as we've understood new ways of experiencing gender in the world, just like I had to push across the table to get folks to understand race, and this is in 2008. One of my students started using pronouns and saying like, "Oh, so hey, my name is Henry. I go by he/him pronouns," and he was my intern. And every time he would say that, I had to make my mouth do that thing because the shape of my brain had been trained in other ways. Yeah. And it's actually a linguistics thing. And it's so deeply, but the ask is for us to change. The ask is for me to make the container that's safe for everybody. And when people are changing literally, within, a span of time that I can't understand, of them knowing themselves to be themselves, I have to move that fast. And I may not be able to do it, and I might bungle it. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to get thrown out the house. I just want to say that out loud because I have bungled it, and I have gotten, and I was not disowned.
That was my question. I was curious. So you do make mistakes. What do you do? What's your advice when, you bungle it? How do you get back up? I mean, for any of you, when these issues, what do you do when you get it wrong? What do you do when you say the wrong thing or
I cry a lot.
dismiss it? Yeah, I feel that. But what's your responsibility there?
I think to an extent you own it. You're human. You're learning. You apologize. I've had an instance where I was a student and she went by she, her, and I got it wrong in front of the class. And I apologized. And I was like, I will not make that mistake again. Mm-hmm. So we're human. We're not going to get it right every time. And then I think you also, when you handle it in the moment, you model how to handle it. Mm-hmm. And then others learn from it and like, oh my gosh. Because I think we're so quick to be like, oh, I would have just died if I had done that thing. But then you see someone do that thing, handle it, and move forward.
Not die.
And not, yeah. So like I said, I've got it wrong before. I know I'll get it wrong in the future, and but own it and then apologize. Or there have been times when I'd say, I did it this way. Was that okay? How should I do it in the future? I did this thing. I don't know. I didn't try to offend you. How can I do this differently next time? And then you learn from it.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on this because I think there's forgiveness available for everybody. Just own it. And if somebody's gonna be really hurt or offended, that may be other stuff that isn't necessarily yours. And we have the daughter, and she's really up on stuff, and I was talking about one of her friends, and I said, she's so cool, and she said, it's they, Dad. And my mind linguistically can't get past there's a singular and a plural. So, and I told her, well, you're going to help me with this. Because I never think of a person as them. I don't. It's just, so I have to teach myself, at least where the culture stands now, what people would like to be respected by, to just teach myself to learn it. And if you blow it, I agree with you. People are like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. But I'm also, I'm 68, so they're like, poor old grandpa.
Well, I wanted to hit on something you just said, so I didn't get to answer the question about generations, Shannon. But one thing I think
I own that, and I'm sorry.
That's all right. Don't do it again.
Okay.
One thing I will say is I think the value kids are undervalued and they're underappreciated, and we don't see their brilliance and their what their abilities. We kind of see them as, but how can I mold you and teach you and fix you? And so we don't always like see them for the amazingness that they are and the different ways they think about things that we haven't thought about, you know, in that way for decades. But I want to go back to what you just said, because youth are experts at things too. And how often do we get to let them know they're an expert? So when you say, okay, how should I handle this? You're talking to like a teenager. Boy, you're giving them power. You're showing them like, I'm listening. I don't know how to do this. Help me. And they need that, because so often, again, they're the ones that like, you're doing that wrong. You have to be here at this time. They don't get to have that power. So I think acknowledging, first of all, that they're amazing, but then also acknowledging that, no, you have some expertise, and I, as the adult, can learn from you.
Excellent. Yeah. There was, it looked like somebody was going to say something. So I'm going to, we just have a few minutes, but I want to talk about your writing and thinking about its legacy. How is your writing or your creative work, what's its responsibility to future generations? Do you think about that? You know, what would you like a future you or a future writer or somebody who is not here when they read your writing to know about this time or this place or about you? I'm going to start, let's start with Roberto, because he looks the most afraid. So we're going to start with him. Jump right in.
I was thinking about my son. I got feelings. So, I was thinking about my son and what is he gonna, how is he gonna read my work? What is he gonna think of me? And then I'll be selfish and I'll think about myself and like, oh, did I get to say what I needed to say? Did I get to feel what I needed to feel, regardless of my son, and bringing my story and all the stories of generations past, and did I do that right? And then it begets. So then it's like, I don't know. I can't. Can I do? It's like a lot of pressure. So that's why my eyes got big, and I don't have a good answer yet. So, yeah.
Do you think about that? Like, who's reading your writing, your stories, your? I mean, I think about Vivian. You talk about your daughter. You know, what would you want her to know about you in this moment when she's your age?
So I guess I'm going to think about generations again. I write for like the past me, the young me, because I didn't find books that looked like me, and I actually hated reading as a kid. You can verify that with my dad and my sister. Hated it. I liked being read too, but I hated reading. I couldn't find characters that looked like me. I couldn't connect. So I would rather write. So instead I wrote. Like I would write stories like Detective JaNay, like seriously. So I think of the past JaNay, but I also think about the future, and I think about Vivian, and I think about how often I'm writing her in the story, not necessarily her, but a character that she can connect to, or perhaps looks like her. So my book, Amara's Farm, it's a little black girl. She's got 2 pigtails. My daughter rocks the pigtails all the time. And Amara's Farm is her favorite book. Of course, she sees this girl that looks just like her. So I think I write for what I talked about already, what Dr. Rudine Bishop said, for mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors. I want future readers, in the case for African American children, to be able to find narratives that are positive ones, that are endearing ones, that are uplifting ones, so that they don't only hear those negative narratives and then internalize them and then label themselves what society labels them. Instead, I want them to find like happy stories that they can connect to, and then makes them lifelong readers. But I also write those sliding glass doors and windows so that someone who doesn't share my same experience, it goes back to, again, seeing that like we're human too, and we have things in common, just like, things in common with you. So I guess I hope future generations pick up my books for different reasons, but ultimately, like compassion and empathy is tied to what they get from my books.
Anything you would like to say about legacy or future generations reading your work? Do you think about that?
Honestly, when I began, I was just writing for myself. I was just processing my stuff. And then my first book was optioned for a stage play, and I went to the opening, and it was a cast of 26, mostly Asian Americans, and it was the first time for most of them to tell a story in their own voice, instead of being the token Asian person in Romeo and Juliet, or the token Asian person in Noises Off, or something like that. And it made me realize, like, oh, like this matters. This helps my community. And so I do keep that in mind when I have these opportunities. I'm half Caucasian. I could write Caucasian stories, but other people are doing that, and maybe not enough are telling the other side of who I am, those stories. And so by doing that, I feel like I'm representing, trying to. I'm learning more about who I am, and also, I'm an author. The book goes out there, but if I can amplify other voices, then that feels really satisfying.
Yeah, the people I often am writing for are people who don't read, and they're in my mind a lot. And when I finally started having a career, I noticed there was a trope that, Luis Alberto Urrea gives voice to the voiceless. And I thought, we've always had voices, you're just not in the habit of listening to them. And so I got this weird position where I could say stuff. And, I know I've told you this before, but, you have to keep your wits about you, and you have to know who you are and where you come from. And, I did a thing in Denver. My first pickup by a rich person in a BMW. I'd never written one. She picked me up at the airport and taking me to her event. And she says, well, we have one question for you. And I said, okay, what? And she said, are you illegal? I know. I'd had my best jacket on, and I was all looking like Biff Manley, I said, what? And she said, well, my people want to know if you're illegal, because if you're illegal, we're not paying you. And I said, first impression, am I documented or undocumented? She said, I'm sorry, you're right, it's okay. I won't ask you the other question. I said, no, please ask me the other question. And she said, well, we wanted to know if we could understand your Mexican accent. I said, can you understand me? So, that is the question for me, and I think about it all the time, and I think about who am I representing, and am I representing people or as interesting primate exhibits at the zoo. And I've seen a lot of that, and I don't like that. And just using a little slang or a little language or, a misplaced bad word, that's not real. And so, yeah, I think about that because I'm getting around the bend a little bit, and you think, well, I'll be gone one of these days, and all that will be left of me, really, is my family and these words. And I want these words to talk to the people I love so much long after I'm gone. Just with a little hope.
I think that might be the perfect place to end this. So I want to thank each of you for taking the time to have this conversation. I hope all of you look all happy, like you just were sitting around and listening to wonderful people talk. So thank you so much. So here's my Fishtrap public service announcement. In about 10 minutes, Rich Wanschneider. How many of you know who Rich Wanschneider is? Raise your hand. Yes. Rich is leading going to have a conversation with Deborah Erling about her latest book with Sacagawea. He's coming up as part of the Josephi he's Fishtrap. Who are we kidding? But he's part of he's the director of the Alvin Giuseppe Library at the Giuseppe Center. If you haven't had a chance to stop in there, I recommend it highly. They're another one of our biggest partner organizations and lovely folks. Also, again, open mic is at 4. I'm guessing the spots are filled today, and then finally we have readings again tonight at 7:30. So take a little break, stretch your legs, and we'll see you back here in a little bit. Thank you.